So, greetings and welcome back to the Cork Graham podcast. I'm driving through the Chugach Mountains here in Alaska. I am just now returning from getting my second-class medical so that I can legally work in the United States as a commercial pilot. Basically for a Part 135. You need a first class if you're going to do Part 121, which is like big airlines, etc. like that. Anyway, what we're talking about today is AI, and I'm noticing that everybody's talking about the fears of Judgment Day. I've talked about it, Judgment Day, Terminator, the robots are going to take over and kill all the humans. Well, remember, everything that's been happening is in order to create shock and fear and chaos amongst the populace. But there's something actually much more insidious, and if you've been tracking that part of our history and then you tie it into AI, you see the overall plan. Remember, my background is I'm a hunter. In the military, I was a warrior, and when I came back from the war, I was a healer. In the native ways, there is a procession, which is first you become a hunter, and you learn techniques as a hunter. In the tribe, the little children would go off and go hunting. Then as they got older, they would go and count their first coup, and they would go into battle. And then as they got older and they survived, they came back and they became healers. But you couldn't become a healer unless you had the other two paths, evolutions. You had to go through the evolution of the hunter. You had to go through the evolution of the warrior. Why is that? In the healing, in the traditional healing practices, you're a hunter, which means that you track the illness of the person, whether it's physical or it's psychological. And once you find what the illness is, then you now have to fight for the patient or the client's mind or their body, right? So you have to actually then fight the battle against the disease, whether it's a mental one or a physical one or a spiritual one. So these are tactics and techniques. These are very important. And now I use those techniques to find out what is the track. Where's everything going? Where did it actually originate? It originated long before the AI technology was even, well, if you go far back, it actually goes way back. Much further than 50s and the 60s and the 30s and the 20s and the teens, or H.G. Wells. What's important about it is that how does it apply to what the plan is? And remember, if you're tracking what's happening, I'm tracking the elites. What do the elites want? The elites want power, and they want subjugation of the populace. How do you get that? Well, in the old days, it would be them sending out their armies to violently subjugate or kill any opposition to basic slavery to these power elites. But the smart thinker says, why expend all that energy? Why expend all that wealth if you can be invited in? So if you want to enslave a populace and you create something, a model, an AI model, that is greeted with anticipation about how it's going to save all this work to be done, and it's going to be able to free up people to have a more liberal and free lifestyle, and they won't have to be bogged down with the concerns of employment and working, because that'll all be taken care of by AI. That's the attractiveness of this. Remember, I told you that Satan, the devil, Dracula, they can't come in the house unless you invite them in. And everybody's inviting them in. I've invited them in. If you've seen, I've used ChatGPT for the last 4 of my thumbnails on YouTube. I had those created on ChatGPT and then Grok, because I couldn't do things on ChatGPT. And then I just finish it off just to keep my skills in photo editing there. Why? Because I know if I totally leave it all 100% up to ChatGPT, this is what's going to happen. I will dumb down. That's the objective of AI. They cause this other deception. It's almost like a limited hangout. For those of you that don't know what a limited hangout, just Google what a limited hangout is. That's where an intel office like MI6 or CIA will put out a story because they know the populace is going to hear about the story, but they put out just enough to satisfy the curiosity of the populace. And once the fickle mind of the sheeple is fed, they close it up, and you get a little snippet, but you don't really get the full details and stories of what's really important to you, but enough to get you to be satisfied and move on. That's what a limited hangout is. The limited hangout that's being put out to everybody is, oh, termination, Judgment Day, the Terminator. It's going to be just like James Cameron's movie, where Arnold Schwarzenegger is going to be the Terminator and is going to destroy all humans. That's a possibility, but that's not as insidious or as dangerous to the freedom of people around the world, which is the best slaves are dumb slaves. Smart slaves don't make good slaves, as evidenced by Spartacus. If we go back into ancient history, Spartacus. At this moment, we can also even talk about Tacitus and the understanding of what Tacitus knew about the Britons when they basically enslaved the Britons, when they took over which is modern day Britain, the southern part, basically England. And they did it by enticing the Celts and the Britons with the ideas of the clothing and the baths that were so refined from what they had before. And Tacitus even says they're so attracted and they enjoy all these accoutrements of being a member of the Roman Empire, not realizing that they're actually just become slaves. And this is what AI is doing. It's enslaving through giving things in terms of, oh, it's going to take care of all the work. It's going to do all these things for you. And it is doing all these things for you. But now it's going to do the same thing to the human mind that technology has done to the sheeple for the last 40 years, with things starting off as seemingly innocuous as a Texas Instruments calculator, handheld calculator, that was able to do the work that previously had to be done by a fleet of computers and databases. Remember, it's like when I first got my Texas Instrument calculator, I think it was in the early 80s or late 70s, I was told that everything, the technology in there was equal to what was in a full room to support the moonshots. That's how it's advanced. And but what has happened is, perfect example. So while my father and his father were able to do all these calculations in their mind almost as fast as the calculator, I got so reliant on the calculator that I wasn't able to do it. And the least I could do was just to write it out by hand, when my father and grandfather were able to do it in their heads. Whether they were doing a carpentry like my father did when he was a teenager, or like my grandfather when he was building pipe organs throughout the Northwest, based out of Spokane. That's how we have devolved. And at the same time, we've become dumber than our parents and our grandparents. We've become softer. This is the thing about that hard times make strong men, strong men make good times, and good times make weak men. And that's where we are right now with weak men, and we have weak men who are in charge of this world. They have no connection to reality. They have no idea what the play out is. You got people like Sam Altman who have no idea how this is going to play out. And when they do have an idea, it doesn't look good, but they try to hide that fact from everybody. But the most insidious part of this is, if you track, remember I was telling you at the beginning, it's all about tracking. So I'm not tracking a gorilla in the jungle in Central America, or tracking a disease or an ailment of a client when I was working as a drug and alcohol rehab counselor. I'm now tracking the elite and finding out what they're doing. And I have heard nobody talk about this, which is this is all about dumbing down the populace in the same manner that they hijacked our education system in 1910. And actually they started thinking about it in 1908 with the Carnegie Endowment hijacked the education system. And along with, well, they did it in 1935 was the final clincher, but it was initiated by John D. Rockefeller Jr. John D. Rockefeller was the one who put down $1 million for the National National Education Board, NEB. And all the teachers were up in arms about it, knowing what it was all about. It was nothing to do with education, everything about indoctrination. And basically indoctrinating people to be workers and not thinkers. And that's a direct quote from Rockefeller, who says, I don't want thinkers, I want workers. He wanted workers, he wanted drones, he wanted worker bees to be in his industrial complex. And we still have this industrial complex, and it keeps on changing. Initially you have the one with the military, now we have the one with the medical. It's the medical industrial complex. It's a fucking racket. Just like Smedley Butler said, you know, war is a racket. Well, you know, medicine has become a racket now. And you notice that when you get double billed illegally by insurance companies and hospitals. That's how, and people don't catch it. And then they're terrified and they wonder how they're going to dig their way out. That's a form of slavery. Credit is slavery. That's why they have it there. They've understood and they play this out. That credit cards, getting you on credit, you will always have to keep on paying that bill. You will never have time to think about what's really happening to you, what's happening to your children, what will happen to your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. You know, I've been listening to frickin' Charlotte Iserbyt.
To change our children through the schools so that they will be very comfortable living in a socialist world management system. And very clear, the teacher's manual.
And or Iserbyt, and she sadly died 2022. She's the one that wrote The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. Everybody, I'm going to put links in here. I'm also splicing in some videos in here that fit with what we're talking about. It's just insidious what they've been doing, and it's nobody's looking at it because of two reasons. One is they don't catch it. The other one is they catch it and they don't want to look at it. Because if you've had something going on since 1910 actively, starting with Rockefeller, and then in 1934, and then getting into the American Historical Association, which, by the way, I find it ironic that who's rewriting our history is Ken Burns. And Ken Burns, who does he always get interviewed by? The American Historical Association, created by the Carnegie Endowment, charged with rewriting American history. They tried to get Charles and Mary Beard. Charles and Mary Beard were honorable people. They had morals and ethics, and they said, hell no. So what they do, they went and found some cheap freaking professors and graduating history teachers and said, hey, if we pay the money and you'll never have to worry about income for the rest of your life, can you create this association? And they did. It's the AHA. It's still there. It's still doing what it's been tasked with doing, which is destroying the country. So they're destroying the United States. The United States is no longer the United States. We have been heavily turned into a socialist state. And originally this was designed when there was still a Soviet Union so that we could bond together and they could have the complete New World Order. This is the stuff I get so pissed off about because we came back from Central America. We were told by the Bush administration to keep our mouths shut. And the reason was, as you saw, when Bush responded to the fall of the Soviet Union, well, didn't even freaking respond. This is Bush Sr., George H.W. That guy's a scumbag. He's part of the order. He's part of Skull and Bones. If you delve into Skull and Bones, I'm hoping I can get Chris Milligan. I've already got the go-ahead from Edward G. Griffin. I'm working on the email for timing and to get that set up, you know, because he's basically one of the last left from this generation, part of my father's generation. My dad was born in 1930. Edward G. Griffin was born in 32. Margaret Iserbyt, she was born in 31. This is a generation that got clear education and had enough of an education to know the difference before what it was like before and after. It's like when my dad was in Cuba. He was there in 57, 58. He was there for the 2 years right after Fidel Castro came in. He saw the change. This is all planned. These are charades. These are games. We got this game going on in frickin' Iran right now. It's all in order to enslave us. And the way they're doing it now, they're going to do it with the AI. And you see this interview with this professor who was just a teacher, which is not to say just a teacher, but he was a good teacher, and you realize what is happening here. And he started doing studies, and he used that as his thesis when he went back to school to get his PhD. And how many people know about this congressional hearing?
Thank you, Dr. Horvath.
Thank you, guys. My name is Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath. I'm a former teacher turned cognitive neuroscientist who focuses on human learning. And I do not receive funding, nor have I ever, from big tech. So a sad fact our generation has to face is this. Our kids are less cognitively capable than we were at their age. Since we've been standardizing and measuring cognitive development since the late 1800s, every generation has outperformed their parents. And that's exactly what we want. We want sharper kids. And the reason for this largely has been school. Each generation spends more time in school. We use school to develop our cognition. Congratulations, you see your correlation. Until Gen Z. Gen Z is the first generation in modern history to underperform us on basically every cognitive measure we have, from basic attention, to memory, to literacy, to numeracy, to executive functioning, to even general IQ, even though they go to more school than we did. So why? What happened? What happened around 2010 that decoupled schooling from cognitive development? It can't be school. Schools basically look the same. It can't be biology. This hasn't had enough time to change. The answer appears to be the tools we are using within schools to drive that learning. Across 80 countries, as Jean was just saying, if you look at the data, once countries adopt digital technology widely in schools, performance goes down significantly, to the point where kids who use computers about 5 hours per day in school for learning purposes will score over 2/3 of a standard deviation less than kids who rarely or never touch tech at school. And that's across 80 countries.
Where it shows that technology has actually led to the dumbing down of people. It's the constant dumbing down of the people. Remember, if you don't use it, you lose it. That saying is there for a reason. It's a solid one. That's the reason I split my own wood. I do that because that's my PT. That's the reason I'm still passing my physical to fly planes with passengers and make sure that they're safe. If I didn't do that, I would just turn into an amoeba. And that's what they're trying to turn us into, is just amoebas who will sit in a chair and continue to run on a conveyor belt, running products in a conveyor that's just basically the factory worker drone. That's what they're turning us into. And if you see this interview with David Icke, this floored me.
Family, basically. I really don't want to say who it was, because they quite scared me, actually. And in a brief moment between filming, she told me of her belief system. And she absolutely, as a utopian socialist, Labour supporter, blew me off my chair by saying, first of all, describing a system of a hive, a system of Britain where there was elite queen bees that she was definitely said she was one of, and that everybody else was in this hive that needed occasional purging, and you needed to get rid of the gays, you needed to get rid of the pickaninnies, she called them, you needed to get rid of immigration, you needed to clear the hive of mental illness, and she was very much part of this. And I said, well, where does that all come from? She said, well, she said, I don't believe in Christianity, I'm a pagan, and we, this elite, we come from a culture where we were put in place by an ancient alien, and that we are in charge, and we're actually physically different. What was quite interesting, and I wonder is that she looked really odd. She had that kind of very strange inbred public, posh person face and was a weird skin and super tall. Now, I mean, at the time, I was just like, this is really odd. And then later on, reading your work, and I've often thought that it was, analogous, the lizard idea. But then researching, back to Lime Grove, David Icke, the interesting work of Nigel Neal, who wrote Quatermass in the Pit, where in the film Quatermass in the Pit,
as a kid,
yeah, he actually describes as a subtext this idea, this alien lands, it breeds with people, it makes a hive system, and he describes how the hive rises up and needs to be cleared by a small group of elite.
So remember, all my links for further investigation on your own are always in the first and only pinned comment. Go look at the pinned comment, follow those links. I'm telling you, that's the reason we have AI. That's why they're pushing it so damn hard. Administration after administration, it's always been about the enslavement of the American people in order to turn us into worker bees, working for this higher echelon small group of elites. And it explains why. Why is it that the Rockefellers and the elites bankrolled Lenin at the same time they were bankrolling the Tsar? Two reasons. One is, if you bet on both sides of a game, or if you bet on all of them on a race, you never lose. That's one reason. But the reason they want, and they endorse, and actually, for my investigations, they actually created Marxism. They created the ideal of Marxism, which is an atheistic philosophy. It's a religion based on the idea. So generational warfare, that's what they've been doing since the 50s. With like a rebel without a cause. I mean, Jesus. Look at that. That was a movie made in the 50s. James Dean. Here's the young generation fighting the older generation. That's not an accident. That's not Hollywood just depicting what they see. No, that's Hollywood being told what to do in order to incite the populace. The media is used in order to incite you. And the education system is being used in order to dumb you down. And the technology more and more is being used to dumb you even further down. If you don't use your abilities that are innately given to you from divine, which is given to you through birth, and you don't use them, they atrophy. Remember what I told you about the little lion clubs? When I was younger, I used to think, why do the lion cubs fight with each other all the time? If they didn't fight with each other through their development, they wouldn't have the muscles and the wherewithal and the strength and development in order to be able to fight off true predators or fight off competing lions during mating season. Or for the females, protect the cubs. That's why we have that. It's just like working out of the gym. You stress your muscles. If you don't stress your brain muscles, your brain cells, they turn to mush, and that's what they want. They just want worker drones. Don't be a worker drone. Pay attention to what the AI is doing. It's getting you to rely on it, and the more you rely on it, the less independent you become, and less able to discern and think individualistically. Then you just become part of the hive. They want us in the hive. On that note, God bless and watch your six.